The hotel room that prints receipts at 17 amperes. M. The first night, the receipt printer woke her. It coughed once in the dark, warmed its little brass roller, and began to spit out a strip of thermal paper that glowed faintly like a cigarette behind cupped hands. The room clock said 2:17 in pale blue digits. Vesper Klein lay very still in bed 5B at the Scissortail Hotel, a brick-walled midtown remnant on North Boston Avenue in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and listened to the tiny buzz and chirp as the machine printed, paused, and printed again, as if it were resuming a conversation it had been having without her for years. Before we begin, tell me where are you listening from and what time is it there? She had checked in late after a client dinner that went long on promises and light on dessert. The year was 2019, early November. The air outside clean after a narrow band of rain slid through, and the sidewalks shone like varnished stage floors. Vesper was 33, a freelance systems tech who patched networks for small hotels that couldn't afford to be down and couldn't afford to hire someone full-time. She traveled with a canvas tool roll, a spare router, a zippered pouch of adapters that looked like a magician's deck, and a mug with a hairline crack she liked to think of as its signature. The Scissortail was her kind of place. A lobby with a brass bell that had learned restraint, a front desk shelf of paperback mysteries for the taking, a night auditor who watched the door like a friend watches a house while you're out of town. He'd been the one to hand her the key card and the 2-page Wi-Fi map, Quill Penner, printed on a plastic badge, as if the name might be borrowed for the night. Night auditors aren't chatty by design, but Quill had leaned forward when she asked for the room farthest from the elevator. He'd said 5B is quiet most of the time, then paused, weighing whether to add something. He didn't. He pointed at the coffee station and said, "The cinnamon packets are the good ones." The printer sat on the desk under the window, small and stubborn, the kind of ticket machine you see in diners and old theaters. No USB cable trailed from it, which made Vesper grin in the dark because devices without visible leashes are both a challenge and a dare. The narrow receipt paper advanced in 2-inch bursts. The room smelled faintly of dust and citrus, the ghost of cleaning solution, and something else warm plastic maybe, or the metallic tang of heat on a coil. She slid out of bed, toes finding the rug, shoulders remembering every winter morning she had reached for her hoodie before her thoughts. The window showed a slice of downtown in sodium yellow, a parked truck with a tarp that breathed a little in the wind, a streetlight haloed just enough to be kind. She stood over the printer and watched it work. The top of the fresh strip read guest ledger at the margin, then a line of text that made her blink. Check-in, Harlan Row, rate $14.50, room 5B arrival, the 12th of October, 1958, comments, 2 pillows only. The paper was unbrowned, the font bold. She knew thermal stock fades to beige with sunlight, goes blotchy with time, and curls if you leave it near a vent. This looked new, but the data was from a year you had to say out loud to make it believable. The printer hummed again and produced another line. Check-in, Odetta Meyer. Rate, $12. Room, 5B. Arrival, the 4th of May, 1957. Comments, traveling with songbooks. She tore the strip and laid it flat on the desk, then pressed a finger to the cool plastic of the printer, as if touch might confess what the eye couldn't. The machine did not shake. It simply waited, polite as a clerk, with more to say. At 2:23, it stopped. A little green light near its only button winked twice like a made-up code. Vesper set the paper on a coaster, lay back down, and stared at the ceiling where the streetlight's slatted glow made a grid like a rehearsal. In 2 minutes, the heater clicked, the mini-fridge answered with its own throat clearing, and her body did the sensible thing it does when a problem cannot be solved and the hour is improper, it slept. Daylight always rationalizes the night. Vesper showered, dressed, and went downstairs with questions arranged in her mouth as if they were items on a parts list. Quill stood behind the desk with a pen balanced across his knuckles like a small seesaw. Room 5B printed receipts at 2:17, she said, like a person reporting a minor plumbing miracle. She slid the strip across. He read it, eyes moving left to right once, then again slower. He did not touch the paper, as if touching would make him complicit in whatever time wanted. He leaned in. You know how old buildings have old anchor points. You hang a new painting, but the wall still remembers the nail. He lowered his voice. That room was a manager's office back when this place was the Francis Motor Lodge. They kept the ledger in there, typed out receipts on a half-width machine bolted to the desk. At close, they printed a roll of check-ins for the night, tore it, and rubber banded the strip to the hardback ledger. Quill tapped the counter. Once, twice. I've heard the story since I was a kid, but the machine in that room was long gone when the Scissortail bought the building. That, he nodded toward the strip, is a thermal ticket printer from the last decade. We put it in to spit bar tabs during wedding weekends. He smiled without humor. The bar's downstairs. He told her what he knew, which was more than most people get for free before 10 in the morning. 2 nights a month, irregular but stubborn, the printer in 5B came alive at 2:17 and printed names from when the room was an office, and the office took cash, and the cash came with a handshake, and sometimes a song. Housekeeping had tried unplugging it, but the little machine held on to its paper and its green light like a dog holds a ball. Engineering had replaced it with a new unit. The new unit learned the trick too, as if the wire in the wall had a voice. Once, a manager put the printer in another room. It printed in the other room. At 2:17, Vesper asked the question an auditor would ask, "Why 2:17?" Quill lifted a shoulder. Night audit on the old system rolled at 2. The manager, a woman named Adelaine Merritt, he wrote in her diary, he gestured toward the wall where black and white photos of the old Francis hung in frames. The audit took 17 minutes most nights because the room charge calculation was slow. He winked, a habit to soften hard edges. That's what the Haunted History Tour says anyway. My grandmother worked housekeeping here in the 60s. She said Adelaine was the kind of woman who could silence a room by looking at a clock. Quill slid the strip back to Vesper. I don't put much stock in anything that prints on its own. But I don't stay in 5B either. She laughed, but softly. I'm the right kind of superstitious, she said. The kind that believes in loose cables and also in writing down names. She folded the strip, tucked it in her notebook, and promised the front desk a stronger signal on the north wing by supper. Work made the morning sensible. Vesper crawled into the equipment closet on 5, balanced her laptop on an inverted bucket, and watched packets move in tidy lines across her screen. The Scissortails network roamed like a polite guest slow if you needed it to be fast. Fast if you weren't asking. She pushed a firmware update, tuned channel widths, stood on a chair to re-angle a ceiling antenna the way you point your head to listen better. Lunch came from a food truck with a chalkboard menu and a line that made the air smell like cilantro and good intentions. She ate on the loading dock, the sun finding her cheekbones and telling her to stop worrying about things no one pays you to worry about. The second night, the printer coughed at 2:17 on the dot. The room's clock, which she had not trusted since it flashed 12:12 after she plugged her phone charger, matched her wristwatch exactly. The printed strip listed names, again, 5 this time, each with a rate that made the era plain. Miguel Corrado, Della and Sten Bay, Bellamy H. Cross, Traveling Sales, G. Whitlow. The comments field sometimes added a phrase that felt like a quotation. Traveling with songbooks, baby sleeps light, keep the radio low. She tore the strip and laid it beside the previous one. The heater ticked its approval. She sat cross-legged on the rug, laptop open, the printer's power cord draped across her thigh. If it's a room ghost, she murmured, it should ignore me. If it's a network ghost, I may as well listen. Her laptop saw the printer as a simple thing on the subnet, a networked ticket device with a default login and a queue history that should have been empty and wasn't. Vesper scrolled. A job log rolling back months logged exactly 2 entries each night with the flag source, Legacy. Someone had written a silly little module into the Scissortails aging property management system, a module that echoed old file structures for nostalgia tours during October. She'd seen that kind of thing done for fun. But this module contained descriptors she didn't recognize. Ledger spool, carriage return key, ribbon jam. These were words from a different machine. The audit program triggered at 2. The ghost queue called itself at 2:17. She checked where it pointed. The path wasn't a path, it was a device ID that didn't match any modern naming scheme. She pinged the device. No answer. She traced the MAC. The vendor code came back to a company that died before the internet had central registration. That made her skin feel too tight. In the morning, white coffee cups clacked, and the lobby television played low, the weather woman pointing at a band of storms where storms like to form. Vesper asked Quill if there were schematics for the old building. He pointed to the office behind the desk. Ground plan framed on the wall. Maybe useful. The hotel had been 2 buildings stitched at the seam. The Francis Motor Lodge on the east, a narrower annex that used to be a savings bank on the west, joined by a flyover corridor at 3 and a clumsy arch at 5. Room 5B sat where the old bank manager's office once had been, according to a penciled note at the edge of the plan. There, a scrawl, printer niche, in lighter pencil, spare line to basement. Quill warmed to the problem the way night auditors do when daylight invites them to be citizens. He called maintenance. A man named Orson arrived in a polo with his name stitched in blue and a toolbox that had its own opinions. Together, they moved the desk in 5B 6 inches and then 3 and exposed a painted-over conduit hole at the baseboard with a thumb-width chase running down into the wall. Orson whistled between his teeth. That's no Romex. That's armored cable from a generation that believed steel could keep time. He tapped the baseboard with the handle of his screwdriver. It answered with the hollow ring of an old closet. In the basement, they found the closet where the spare line went to not exactly die. The air was colder down there, humid the way the past is humid. A metal cabinet stood against the wall, padlocked, a gray panel humming like a neighbor practicing scales. Orson tested the lock with a pick he swore he hadn't lost. The door swung open. Inside, another little printer sat, twin to the one upstairs, its power indicator dark, its paper roll neat as a submitted term paper. A thin cable ran from a bracket down into a conduit box with 2 stories to tell. One was modern CAT cable, patched to the scissortails switch. The other looked like fabric-insulated wire on lead. Orson touched it with reverence and withdrew his hand. You shouldn't be alive, he murmured to the box. Then he turned to Vesper. Want me to pull the breaker for this room tonight at 2:15? See if it stops. She shook her head before she quite knew why. The motion felt rude. Let me listen once more, she said. Then, if it's a loop, we cut it. The third night, nothing is supposed to happen. Patterns prefer 3 as a way to make you distrust them. Vesper made tea in the room kettle with the cinnamon packet Quill had sworn by. She texted her brother a photo of the printer and a caption that read, Haunted Bar Bill. And he sent back the shrug emoji that meant, I love you, but weirdness is your brand. At 2:17, the printer began, but this time the sound rode a breath of air cold enough to raise her arm's small hairs. She stood close enough for the paper to curl against her knuckles and read each line as it arrived. Check-in. Adelaine Merritt. Rate. Comp. Room. 5B. Arrival. The 12th of October, 1958. Comments. Night audit. She reached for the strip and her fingers trembled, mildly, like a person handed the microphone at a small funeral. The machine whirred without printing for a count of 6, then resumed, the font just a touch lighter. Check-in. Quince Palmer. Rate $9.50. Room 309. Arrival the 12th of October, 1958. Comments, meeting at dawn. The room held its usual choir, fridge, heater, hallway, ice machine, 2 turns down, but behind it all, she heard a soft clicking. Not printer, not clock. Keys. The slow press and release of typewriter keys. Somewhere not in the room and not far enough away. She froze, because freezing is a way of letting more senses work. Her body made itself a listening instrument. The keys whispered. Again, 3 strokes. Pause. 2. The printer spit a final line. End of ledger. Prepared by A. Merritt. Time, 2:17 amperes, M. Vesper did what the body asks. She sat on the bed with the strip in her lap and waited for her breath to level. It did. The heater ticked, the fridge purred, the typewriter stopped pretending, the sound folded itself up and slid under the door. She slept because being a person who works with systems means you've learned to stack your fear on a shelf when there's nothing urgent to do with it. Morning turned the printer into a device again. She took the strip down to the desk. Quill stared at the word comp and the name he had heard his grandmother say on summer porches when the heat wanted out of the day. He asked to borrow the strip to show his manager, a woman with the fast walk gait of someone who plans 2 days all the time. The manager's name was Letha Croft, and she looked at the strip like a problem that could be solved with a memo. She was polite and firm. "We have tours on Fridays for the people who want goosebumps," she said. "We prefer to keep the goosebumps from rewriting our Google reviews." Vesper smiled, a tight little smile that said, "I won't post, I don't do that work, I just want to know what the wire knows." Letha sighed. The scissor tail was a college internship that never ended for her. The building was her thesis. She pointed at the framed photo behind the desk. Adelaine Merritt, hair pinned like a decision, stood at a wooden desk the size of a Buick, hand on a ledger book, face turned to a camera that had learned to respect her. The caption read, "Francis Motor Lodge, C 1959, Night Manager." Letha lowered her voice. Family lore says Adelaine died at her desk in 2003 after the building had been empty 6 years because she refused to move a box when the bank wanted it. The family had the key to the back door from the old days. She snuck in sometimes to straighten things that did not require her. A neighbor saw her light. By the time anyone checked, the coffee had gone cold and she'd written the date on a yellow legal pad with a line under it, like an anchor. I don't know if the story is true. I do know names have a way of using rooms until you say them out loud and then they rest. That afternoon, Vesper sat on the floor of 5B with her laptop and a coil of patience. She sniffed the packets between server and printer and saw the little ghost job present a string of bytes at 2 minutes past 2, announce itself as ready at 2:16, and request the queue at 2:17 with a line that included a date spelled in words, not numbers. October 12. She set a capture to record it tonight. She did not know what she would do with the proof, but the act of capturing felt like putting a box around a wild thing without requesting its death. The fourth night, she did not sleep. At 2:16, the room gathered itself. At 2:17, the printer began. The first name landed like a quiet gavel, Harlan Rowe. Again, as if the ledger wanted to list the set that belonged with the date, as if the building had a playlist for that night and needed it to end correctly. The second name, Odetta Meyer. The third, Quince Palmer. The machine word, then it printed a line that wasn't a line she understood. Checkout, A. Merritt. Time, 2, 17 amperes. M. Balance, $0. Drawer, locked. The room changed temperature by a needle's width. The way a body registers changes a thermostat does not. The typewriter sound returned, louder, as if the keys had moved closer, as if someone had rolled the desk chair to the doorway. Vesper stood. The bathroom light made a rectangle on the carpet. She turned it off and let the room be only the room. In the dark, a kind of courtesy arrived. She spoke to the space like a person speaks to a skittish animal. "I hear you," she said softly. "I see what you print. If you're finishing something, finish. If you need a witness, I'm here." The keys worked once, gently. The printer fed a final inch and stopped. The heater clicked off, as if called on. The fridge made a small, delighted sound, the way fridges do when they extract a victory from physics. Vesper lay down slowly, like a person trying not to wake a toddler, and watched the window make a square on the wall. She did not sleep much. She did not feel punished by that. On Friday, Quill called his grandmother. She came in with a smile that wore 80 years as if they were a favorite cardigan. Her name was Thalia Penner. She had hands that did hair buns right the first time and eyes that counted change without looking. She stood in 5B and curtsied to the air, lightly, like a joke only the past finds funny. She pointed at the baseboard where the printer niche had been long before this printer knew it was one. And she told a story the way people in the middle of the country tell them, in straight lines, with pauses for the parts that don't quite behave. Back when the Francis was a stop on the oilfield run, she said, Adelaine kept books for men who couldn't read receipts and kept rooms for women who didn't need to be asked why they traveled alone. She printed the audit every night, tore the strip, tucked it under the ledger ribbon, and locked the drawer. Her niece said she was proud of how long she could do the math in her headroom tax, city tax, discount for the flood man whose boots never dried. When the hotel closed in 1997, Adelaine kept a key. In 2003, she came in one last time to make the numbers even. She wrote the date, she drew a line. She put her hand to her chest like she was looking for a pen and fell as neat as folding a shirt. The firemen took 10 minutes to arrive. I put flowers on the door, and then the bank put a new lock on the door, and then time put dust on the lock and years on us all. Thalia reached out and touched the printer as if it were the hem of a dress in a department store window. Adelaine believed in drawers that closed, she said. It sounds like over again at 2:17, she gets to do that part, finish the roll, tuck it in, say goodnight to accounts. She is the kind of woman who would find that worth doing. Vesper spent Saturday building a workaround that no manager had asked for and no ghost could be fooled by. She pre-programmed a rule in the printer's network profile. At 2:16, the device would capture its own print job to a text buffer and email it to a special address she made for the Scissortail historian. Proof for people, paper for the room. At 2:15, she and Orson stood in the basement closet like two burglars having second thoughts. Orson touched the breaker switch. He looked at her. She did not nod. He did not flip it. Upstairs in 5B, the printer coughed, purred, and worked. Down here, the old gray panel vibrated, soft as sleep. At 2:20, Vesper's email pinged her phone with a single message. Subject, ledger. Body, 3 lines. Names, rates, the comp, the sign-off. Prepared by A. Merritt. Time, 2:17 amperes. M. She did not sleep that night. She didn't mind. She lay on the bed, hands behind her head, and watched the room recede from what rooms are in daylight containers, shelves, angles, and become what rooms are when you let them be churches. Limits, repetition, silence between notes. She thought about drawers, about the way her work was mostly closing things in the right order so strangers could open them and recognize what they saw, about how a hotel is a machine for forgiving you for not being home. On Sunday, she checked out. She left a thank you envelope at the desk with Quill's name written in neat engineer's block. In it, a printout of the email rule and a small drawing she'd made of the baseboard hole with an arrow labeled here, "The wire remembers." Quill held the envelope like it might be heavier than it was. Letha met her at the door. "I can't exactly put this in a maintenance request," she said, meaning the week Vesper had just spent listening to a machine be more honest than any of them owed their jobs. "But I can tell you what we can do. We can frame a copy of your email in the staff room and call it the drawer letter. We can show it to anyone who works past midnight and forgets that ending is a kindness. We cannot run a Halloween promo in 5B because some stories don't belong to customers. We cannot unplug the thing that works for someone who isn't here anymore." Vesper smiled. That's more than most places do for the living. She drove out of Tulsa with the radio off, south, then east, then north again, the planes rolling around her like a low lullaby. She stopped at a gas station where the coffee was too strong and therefore perfect. She called her brother to tell him a story with no real twist and therefore true. She didn't say the name of the printer because sometimes a tool deserves privacy. She didn't say the name of the woman who closed drawers because she had said it enough. She didn't say 2:17 because she had learned to say it in her head as a kind of vow to be kind to the people who work at that hour. Months later, back in Tulsa for a different job in a different building, she walked past the Scissortail one evening just before Christmas when the lobby held a neighbor party. A small tree wore strands of tickets in place of garland bar tabs printed for fun, red inked with dates and little notes in flare pen script. Quill waved from the desk, a Santa hat angled to keep his dignity. Letha stood by the fireplace talking to a city inspector whose expression said he had learned to sleep at last. On the stair, a woman in her 50s, adjusting an ugly sweater, looked at Vesper in that way strangers sometimes look at one another, as if they had agreed to be in the same hallway before they were born. Vesper stopped in for a minute. She drank cider from a paper cup. She left before anyone could ask for a funny story with a good ending. She slept at a chain hotel by the interstate where the printer in the lobby spat bills for bottled water and where midnight meant nothing in particular. At 2:17, she woke and smiled at the ceiling, not because any machine had called to her, but because she had trained her body to stand witness for a time that belongs to other people. She poured water into a glass and listened to the small sound it made when it met the bottom, hollow turning to full. She said the name she had been given as if returning a borrowed book. She slept again. If you ever find yourself in a hotel room and a device on the desk prints at a time that sounds like a secret, do what Vesper did. Don't yank the cord. Don't film it for the internet like proof is a currency and this is your chance to spend. Sit up, put your feet on the rug, read the names if names arrive. If you can, make a rule that gives the living something to hold a copy, a note, an email to a person whose job is to remember. Then, let the room have its paper. Let the drawer close. Say thank you to the time that isn't yours. The night staff everywhere will feel it like a hand they don't have to see. And if you must know, it goes like this. The little green light winks, the paper unfurls. The names Harlan, Odetta, Quince, Adelaine roll by, small and austere and whole. The room changes by a breath, the heater stands down, the fridge on duty hums, the typewriter in the wall or the idea of a typewriter slides one last carriage to the right and returns. The drawer locks. The ledger for that one night balances again. You will not have been asked to fix anything. You will not have been asked to believe. You will have been asked to witness. A job that counts. When dawn smears light along the window, when the city yawns and rolls, when the night auditor hands the keys back to daytime and goes home to sleep in a room with a plant that knows their voice, you will have been part of the smooth that makes this complicated world possible. Somewhere, a printer coughs once more, polite as always, and waits another 24 hours to do what it knows on the dot without apology. If, later, someone asks why a small hotel on North Boston Avenue keeps a finicky old ticket machine in a room that could rent for $2 more without it, you can say this. Not every device has to justify itself in money. Sometimes a machine is a ritual. Sometimes a ritual is a receipt that proves someone was here and did their work and went to sleep. And sometimes, at 2:17 in the morning, a woman who once locked a drawer she loved gets to do it again, which is as reasonable a reason as any you'll hear for anything that persists in this country, shaped by roads, rooms, ledgers, and the soft insistence of people who finish what they start. The 911 call that came after the funeral. They folded the flag for him at the little brick church on Ellsworth Avenue, and the wind tried to take it twice before the honor guard's hands persuaded it to behave. It was a raw Thursday in late January in a river town in southeastern Ohio, the kind of cold that makes sound travel farther than sense. The man in the casket was Eamon Ridge, a volunteer firefighter and the sort of neighbor who shoveled 2 extra porches without mentioning it later. The service ended at 4, the last handshake landed at 4:20, and by nightfall, the street had gone back to being only a street. At 9:13, Leora Penn took her seat at the county dispatch console, slid on her headset, and watched the board come alive. At 9:31, the line marked 911 flashed with a familiar number. His number, the man everyone had just buried. Before we begin, tell me where are you listening from and what time is it there? Leora had fielded storms and barn fires and wrong turns called in as kidnappings. She had coaxed calm from people whose words came like hail on a tin roof. She had heard the first breath of a baby through a phone held in shaky hands and the last breath of a stranger who needed someone to hear it. She was 34, kept her hair short to keep the headset from snagging, and wore a gray cardigan because the room ran cold to keep the computers honest. Her desk held 2 photographs wedged into the bezel of the monitor. One showed a river in summer, green as a promise. The other showed Eamon and his daughter Cass standing in front of the station engine with that look people get when duty gives them a reason to grin. The year was 2022. The county had upgraded the system, and the board pulsed with the soft light of new money that still felt like a borrowed suit. Lines identified towers and cross streets. Repeat callers had little tags. When Eamon's number flashed, it wore the tag she had put on it a year ago, Station 4. Her stomach made a small, foolish turn. Her hand did not. She tapped the line open. 911. What is your emergency? Static, not empty. The kind of static that carries weather in its mouth. A faint hiss like tires on wet asphalt far away, then a click as if someone had covered the microphone with a thumb and lifted it again. Leora glanced at the automatic location box. The system offered a circle that could have been a dozen blocks wide and no more. The tower showed the bluff above the river. The timer on the call rolled past 10 seconds, then 15. The headset warmed in her hand. "Hello," she said, voice even, the way training turns fear into architecture. "If you can speak, I am here." Something moved under the static. A breath, slow, disciplined. The way firefighters learn to breathe through a mask like they are rationing the ocean. She had listened to Eamon for years as he called in traffic stops and barn smokes and mutual aid requests in that unshowy voice he kept, even when the ceiling thought it was tired of being a ceiling. Her throat tightened without permission. The board did not care. It kept time. The night supervisor, Brandt, rolled his chair closer, not touching her cord. He was 50, part-time philosopher, full-time keeper of snack drawers. His eyebrows asked a question he did not give words to. Leora tapped a note onto the incident log with deliberate fingers. Caller number displays as decedent from earlier funeral. Open line. Faint audio. Possible misroute from memorial device. Possible spoof. Monitor. "Eamon," she said quietly, because sometimes names open doors the way keys do. "If you can hear me, give me any sound." The line breathed once more, then found a voice. Not bright, not ghostly, a man speaking like someone who had walked all day and only now remembered he could sit. It said one sentence, 3 words, patient, back door locked. Brandt's hand hovered over the radio mic. Leora nodded once. He paged Station 2 because Station 4 was morning and Station 2 would show up with their coats half buttoned and their hearts arranged like a team. He sent them to the Ridge home on Quince Street, the small white place with a porch swing that had never let a guest feel foolish for needing to sway a minute. Leora kept her voice on the line. "Back door, locked," she repeated, writing it, hearing it, feeling the way the sentence wanted to be a map. "Is someone inside?" Nothing answered at first. Then a second sentence, softer. "Cass asleep." Brandt's fingers were already moving the way piano players do when the song makes them want to be faster than they are. Officers on the midnight swing shifted their routes without complaint. The medic crew out of town angled their rig toward Quince in case grief had found a trick that needed medical names. Leora sent a quick text to the on-call clergy liaison because the county did not believe in letting families be alone with what they could not name. "Eamon," she said, steady. "We're sending them. Stay with me if you can." The line hissed like rain on a steel roof, and then went quiet. Not the click of a hang-up, the kind of quiet a room makes when a story finally sits down. The call timer rolled to 1 minute, 23 seconds, then stopped. Disconnected, the board told her, cheerful as a toy that believes its work noble. Brandt opened his mouth and then closed it. He reached for his coffee and decided it was the wrong kind of night for coffee and reached for water instead. Leora sat very still for a moment and felt the way adrenaline stands up in your body and refuses to sit until you give it a task. She gave it the task of listening. The lines danced with ordinary need. A possum in a kitchen. A husband who had cut his hand on a jar. A neighbor who had heard a window break and then realized it was the television. Her hands did their work. Her ear held a room for the line that had gone quiet. Officer G. Park radioed in first. Voice crisp. Tires crunching on salt in the street. Unit 3-1. Quince Street. Back porch light on. Back door indeed locked. Copy request to knock. "Copy," Leora said, hearing her own voice make simple shapes. "Proceed." There are knocks that sound like questions and knocks that sound like the start of a fight. Officer Park knocked like a person who has played in a string quartet. Firm. Meticulous, willing to wait between knocks. Leora heard the long, thin silence on the open radio channel that means everyone has decided to breathe in sync. A porch swing creaked, whether from wind or memory. Then Park again, softer. Visual on subject in living room, Teen. Asleep on couch. Television on mute. No visible distress. We are making entry. Park called the locksmith number taped to his visor, because there is always one, and he also called the small cheat that officers inherit, which is to lift the back door on its tired hinges when you turn the key the wrong way. The door opened, a floorboard confessed itself. Park moved through a small kitchen that smelled like heat and spice and thyme. He said, quiet as a blessing, Cass, it's G, it's me. The girl woke with that rough sound grief makes when it has only just let go for half an hour at last. Back door, Park said into his shoulder mic. Locked, now secured. Subject breathing, oriented, tearful, says she fell asleep and forgot the back after the last aunt left. She says her dad would have said it. She says she heard him say it sometimes, even when he was alive, when she forgot. I'm locking up, then staying here until her aunt returns. The call had been the little bridge a county makes when one house cannot manage all its doors alone. Leora typed. She logged, she breathed. She answered a call about a siren that would not stop on a fire alarm panel, which is a call that can ruin a night or return it to its usable shape. She told Brant she needed 30 seconds, stood up from her console, walked to the stainless sink by the break room door, and washed her hands as if she had been in a kitchen that required respect. At 10:48, the line lit again. Same number. The board did not know how to feel about that and chose its usual indifference. Leora took it. 911. A voice lives inside a headset after a while. The nerves learn routes, the body decides where to keep the sound. The phrase came through low and clear. Basement. Pilot light. She did not hesitate. She sent the fire crew already on Quince next door. She told Park. She told the aunt, who had come breathless from her own house 3 blocks away, that they were going down the cellar stairs for the little square of flame that keeps a winter from doing more harm than good. She heard Cass in the background say, without fright, he always listened to the furnace like it was trying to tell him a joke. Engine 3 called in. Pilot light out. Gas smell minimal. Windows open. Relit. Carbon monoxide monitor registers safe. A firefighter Rowe, who had once done stand-up for exactly 2 open mic nights, and then decided his comedy belonged in the bay with his coworkers, added gently, whoever called this in has good ears. The board calmed, the town kept its little noises, the river told the ice what to do, and the ice obeyed or not. Leora's shift slid past midnight. At 1:19, she poured tea she did not want and drank it because warm things are a kind of law. At 1:40, an old man reported a woman knocking on his side door asking for a light, and she sent Park and his partner again, and it turned out to be a neighbor who had locked herself out, and they laughed about solutions and did not mention grief, so it would not be tempted to take that house too. At 2:19, when the dispatch room feels like a lighthouse that forgot whether the bay is wide or just an eager creek, the line lit a 3rd time. Leora did not say amen out loud. She let the humanities teacher voice in her head that once told her names have heft say it for her. 911. This time the sentence was longer. Not elaborate, not difficult. The kind of sentence men say when they've spent their lives making tool lists. Check the pan on the back burner. Leora's fingers moved before she could tell them to, and 10 seconds later, Park said on the radio that a pan of oil sat glowing on the stove, forgotten by a cousin who had come bearing food, and then wept, and then gone to call another cousin and set the phone down on the porch rail. Park killed the burner, slid the pan onto a cold eye, and said, "Tell whoever's on that line thank you again." She said, "I will," and understood how inadequate that was, and also how there is no better sentence at 2:20 in the morning when a house has been held upright by 2 extra words spoken by a man with no air left to push them. By dawn, the calls had slowed to their usual winter trickle. The board made its little satisfied beeps, the shift change crept near. Leora printed the overnight logs for the lieutenant in charge and set them in the bin with the neatness of a person who believes paper is a form of kindness. She took off her headset, set it on the hook, and let her neck decide it had been a stiff night On her drive home, the river looked like a sheet of hammered tin under a sky that had not yet decided whether to blush. She stopped at the corner store for milk and oranges. The clerk rang her up and asked if she had been at the funeral, because everyone had been at the funeral, even if they had not parked their bodies in a pew. Leora said yes, and the clerk said he had known Eamon since they were boys, back when the river took two boys and gave back one, and how the one who came back had never raised his voice again unless it was to make a frightened kid laugh in a smoky basement. Leora listened. The clerk put 2 extra oranges in her bag, the way men do when they feel the night reach its hand into the room and cannot keep all the light from leaving. She slept until noon and then sat in her kitchen with the radio low and the blinds open to teach the afternoon how to behave. Her phone chimed with a message. It was Cass. Leora had given her number to the aunt without thinking, and nothing about this felt like a boundary violation now. The message was a picture of a backdoor lock and a caption. "He did it again, thank you." She replied, "You did it." He reminded, "That is a team." Cass sent back a heart in the color teens choose when they mean it and do not want to seem silly. Word traveled without gossip's teeth in it. People told each other the version they could bear. Some said the call after the funeral had been a trick of towers, an echo, a message scheduled by a grieving mind that had set a reminder on a phone. Some said Eamon was still doing his rounds, making sure pilot lights and pans behaved. The chaplain said he did not know the mechanics of it and did not care, that love gets to serve in whatever uniform it likes. The fire chief said quietly to Leora, "If my number ever lights your board and I am not in a position to help myself, send the crew. I will not be offended if you use my name to get them there faster." It is Wannon. The next week brought the kind of snow that erases the edges of things. Leora worked 3 overnights in a row and learned to sleep in squares of 4 hours like a cat. She took a call from a man who had found his wife on the floor and guided him to count and compress, and the medics arrived before the counting rasped the hope out of his voice. She took a call from a woman who had locked herself in a bathroom because her boyfriend had stopped being gentle, and she kept the woman talking about the photograph on the wall while the officers climbed the stairs 2 at a time. She did not think about the line until it lit again 2 Fridays later at 1 in the morning. She kept her voice clean. 911. Eamon's voice came again, thinner, like a person speaking through a scarf. It said, in a tone part instruction and part apology, "Box of matches in the junk drawer beside the oven. Throw them out." She told Park. Park went. He opened the drawer and found a box that had wicked itself damp and mean. He took it to the back porch and soaked it and binned it, and then came inside and wrote a sticky note for Cass that read, "Your dad told on you." She woke to it and laughed in that shocked way laughter has when it has been given back its license to exist. Not every call was that kind. Once, the line connected, and all Leora could hear was faint wind and the hollow tick of a cooling engine, and she understood, without needing the lieutenant's later confirmation, that this had been the night the station bays opened, and Eamon's truck had been driven back from the long, slow procession, and the engine had clicked in that language. Machines use to admit fatigue. Once, the line carried only a sound, like boots on gravel, exactly 3 steps, then the pause of a man looking at a sky he used to know from a ladder truck. Once, nothing came at all, and still she stayed on the line the way you stay on a porch after a friend has gone inside, just in case one more sentence needs to come out and walk around in the air. Spring loosened the river. April made the churchyard look less stern. Cass finished school with a concentration that made her teachers write small notes on the bottom of her papers. "You have turned into a person who trusts herself." Leora saw her at the station on an open house Saturday, and the girl hugged her the way nieces do their aunts without asking for the right to be related. They stood under the engine bay's great door and listened to the way small kids treat sirens like musical instruments when given permission. Cass said she sometimes still heard it, the way a voice comes into a room without needing to open the door. She said the voice had told her to bring in the porch rug before a thunderstorm that would have flung it across the block. She said the voice had told her to drink water before her stomach had the language to beg for it. "What do you think it is?" she asked. not demanding that it be a ghost or an algorithm. I think you live in a county where people answer one another when called, Leora said. I think sometimes lines open from one room to another because the rooms were built that way by love. I think if we say it out loud too many times, the day will get shy and pretend it never happened. And I think your dad trained his whole body to go when someone needed a sentence, and I do not know what training looks like later. Thanks for watching Allen's To Help Pray. Cass nodded as if she had been offered advice about lifting with her legs, not her back. She put her hands on the engine's bumper like a kid checking the pulse of a whale and whispered thanks in the dull shine where she thought it might carry. The last call came in July, on a night that smelled like cut grass and the electric promise of storm. The board was quiet. Brant had his feet crossed at the ankle, the way he did only after midnight when the county behaved. The line lit. Leora took it with the care of a person accepting a candle in wind. 911. There was no static, no breath, only a single word, perfectly ordinary, soaked in a patience she would remember until the last hour of her life. Enough. Enough what? She asked, back straight, pencil ready. The word came again, a thought set gently on a table. Enough. Then a long exhale, the temperature of a day in which someone has put down a tool they are proud to have used and is ready to wash their hands. She typed the word. She did not send units. She did not mention it to Brant until the end of the hour, when she said it out loud the way you say a number twice to make sure you got it right. He nodded. He threw a cough drop to her like a baseball, and she caught it and laughed because bodies insist on living. There were no more calls after that. The system reassigned numbers as systems do. The board forgot how to glow with that tag. When Leora sat at her desk and the photographs leaned against the monitor made their steady witness, she still sometimes heard the faint tap of a firefighter's gloved hand on a doorframe, the universal signal for ready. She bought a small, heavy key hook for her own kitchen, put it by the back door, and never forgot again. She found that when she walked past the Ridge place on mornings when she needed to see the river before she could trust the day, she would look at the back door and feel not a haunting, not an ache, but the exact rectangular comfort of a thing that had been understood and done. If this kind of thing ever happens where you live, if a phone rings after a set of shoulders in town have lowered themselves to the work of grief, if a name appears on your console that your heart wants to call impossible, do what Leora did. Answer. Stand in the narrow bridge between rooms, ask short questions with soft edges, send help, write down exact words. The world is made of exact words and the work that follows them. Believe nobody and nothing too hard. Let the river decide what is memory and what is rumor. And when the voice finally says enough, let your hands say thank you by resting them, palm down, on the desk you have kept clean so the night can put its weight there for a minute. And if you are sitting in your kitchen with a back door that gets forgetful, say the date out loud to bring the day to heal. Late January 2022. Early April 2022. The hot night in July when rain forgot its manners. Say the town's name so it will remember it has one. Say Amen. Say Cass. Say Leora. Practice the sentence that saved a pan and a pilot light and a teenager who deserved a house that understood locks. Back door locked. Then lock it, then sleep. The county will keep its watch. The river will balance its own ledger. Somewhere, a dispatcher you will never meet will lay a pencil down on a pad with a line drawn through the last open box, a small, perfect check that means this part of the night is finished and the next part may begin. Neighbors heard a piano at 3 amperes. The house was empty. Neighbors heard it first at 3 in the morning. A piano coming through the thin savanna fog, like a voice behind gauze. Bright, deliberate, not a practice scale, but a song shaped by hands that knew what they were asking the instrument to feel. Windows glowed weakly along Jones Street. Porch fans turned lazily, pushing warm air that smelled like iron and rain. The music came from number 119, the Carpenter House, which stood empty, locked, listed, and waiting. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? The year was 2019, late August, heat pressing the city flat. The Carpenter House had been vacant since early summer, after an estate sale peeled it of rugs and lamps, and the porcelain spaniel that used to guard the hearth. The last owner, a retired piano teacher named Odile Carpenter, had passed in late spring. Her nieces lived up in North Carolina, good people by all accounts, but too far away to keep fresh flowers on the mantel. Realtors came and went with their careful smiles. Contractors measured crown molding and murmured about old wiring. But at 3 in the morning, the house was nobody's, and then very suddenly, everyone's. Caius Mercer lived across the street in an apartment above a bookstore that smelled like paper and cedar oil. He was 37, a sign painter by trade, a listener by habit. At 3:02, he stepped onto his balcony with a glass of water and a small, unreasonable hope that the sound would be a radio left on in a passing car. It wasn't. It had the weight of wood and felt and string. It had the soft, percussive bloom that only happens when hammers strike and then get out of the way. He thought of the names of pieces like someone reciting Saints, Nocturne, Arabesque, Consolation, and then recognized the one it was. Claire de Lune played a hair slower than most, with crescendos that rose like someone standing up carefully from an old chair. He could hear the rubato in the right hand, the left hand anchoring, a conversation between patience and longing. The melody reached for the air over Forsyth Park and came back with a question. Caius put on shoes. On the sidewalk, humidity wrapped him in a damp shawl. Moths battered the street lamp. Down the block, a delivery truck sighed at a stop sign. The music continued. Not perfect, not sloppy. Human. Nora Bly stepped from the shadows of her courtyard with a leash looped around her wrist, her old hound Amos peering from behind her knees. Nora was 68, the kind of neighbor who knows who is supposed to be where and when. She tilted her head. Your radio. Her voice made it a question. Or is that in the house? It's in the house, Caius said, and the words made the night hold itself differently. They were not the only ones. Mr. Patel from the corner bodega came up the steps wiping flour from his hands because insomnia likes small projects, and he had been making dough for morning pastries. On the second floor of a yellow clapboard place, a girl in a college sweatshirt cracked her window and frowned. An Uber drifted past and slowed. Even the driver leaned, listening. At 3:08, Nora called it in. She had a way with dispatchers, polite, precise, impossible to ignore. House is listed vacant, number 119 Jones. We have audible music consistent with a live piano. We are gathering out front. Please send a unit to clear the property. She gave her name, spelled it, gave her number, spelled it, and ended the call with thank you in a tone that made the words into a promise. 2 patrol cars rolled up at 3:17. Blue lights turned low so they watched the houses in a suggestion instead of a demand. Officer Malik Rhodes took the steps 2 at a time, his hair braided neatly, a scar like a grace note at the corner of his mouth. Behind him came Officer Lori Fenwick, steady and compact, the kind of person who never lost track of where the nearest door was. They paused at the front door. The music did not pause. In the short stillness between measures, you could hear the damp city breathing. Let me try the realtor box first, Fenwick said. Odile's nieces had left a lockbox hooked to the iron rail. Fenwick called the on-call number posted on the yard sign, woke a man named Barrett, whose voice came up out of sleep like a diver out of deep water, and got the code. She opened the box, palmed the key, glanced at Rhodes. He nodded. She unlocked the door. Inside, the air moved in waves. The foyer smelled like lemon oil and old paper. A staircase curved up like a question mark. To the left, the front parlor opened wide, and there, by the tall window, sat the piano that had not found a buyer. A Nabe Grand, walnut, its lid propped, its harp gleaming like a good secret. The bench was pulled out, the fallboard was up. No one sat there. But the song did not stop. Rhodes stepped closer, palms open, as if approaching an animal. Fenwick circled wide, eyes on corners and thresholds. Rhodes leaned and looked under the body of the piano the way a child looks under a bed. Empty. No pedals depressed. No one hiding. The music flowed with the serene confidence of someone who had forgotten to be afraid. The keys moved. Not all of them, just the ones the melody asked for, but they moved as surely as if struck by fingers. Rhodes watched a middle C rise and fall. He put his hand near the key, not touching, feeling only the movement of warm air. He swallowed. His throat made a sound like a small door closing. Player mechanism, Mr. Patel whispered from the doorway, half hopeful. Some have rolls hidden in the belly. Rhodes eased the bench back with his shin and lifted the front panel below the keys. Inside, felted hammers, whips, jacks, springs, everything that makes a grand, no motor, no roll. No belts, just the old generous mechanics of wood and intention. He let the panel fall softly back into place. The music reached the place where the melody thins into light. Fenwick walked the ground floor with calm hands and an efficient gaze. Dining room empty, kitchen empty, pantry empty, back door closed, latched, chain intact, powder room lonely and clean. Upstairs, a short hall with 2 bedrooms and a study. She went up. Caius waited in the foyer, pulse in his wrists. The house sighed the way old houses do when strangers put weight on old boards. A ceiling ticked. Somewhere a pipe tapped. The piano did not care. It turned a corner into the passage that always lands too beautifully, and Caius felt something behind his ribs try to stand up. Fenwick returned. No one, she said. Windows latched, closets filled with air and dust. She cut a look at the instrument. The song decelerated like a train entering a station and came to its hush of an ending. The final chord hung and softened and then quiet. They all stood there for the kind of moment that takes its shoes off before it enters a room. Savannah shifted outside. Moths performed their soft violence at the glass. Across the street, a cat made a decision and took it back. Rhodes ran his hand along the piano's cheek as if it were a horse. He said, "I'm going to log this as an unsecured property check, no suspect found, no damage, no sign of forced entry. We'll notify the realtor to have a locksmith rekey and to secure the back windows." He looked at Nora. "We can sit on the block a while. If it plays again, call." Nora nodded. She had that way of nodding that promises she will do more than that. At 4, the block slept with one eye open. At 5, milk trucks wrote their notes on the morning. By 7, Rhodes had told the story to a sergeant who smiled with one corner of his mouth and said, "The city has old bones. Let it have old songs." By 11, Barrett had a locksmith on a ladder checking sashes and pins. At noon, a pair of teenagers in black shirts, tagged with the name of a moving company, carried a rolled rug out to a van and joked too loudly about ghosts the way kids do when they hope fear will think they're busy and pass them by. That night, at 3:01, the music began again. Not Debussy. The opening was older, the cadence stiffer, a Bach sarabande measured like footsteps on a tile floor. Slow, precise, inevitable. Neighbors emerged as if called by the same small bell. Caius took the steps 2 at a time. Nora did not bother with shoes. Officer Rhodes arrived inside 3 minutes, not even pretending he had not parked around the corner to make it easier to be the kind of cop he wanted to be. They found the same room, the same instrument, the same absence of anyone at all. The keys rose and fell, a metronome's mind and a prayer's heart. Rhodes stood at the tail, hand on the rim, feeling the sympathetic thrum in his palm. He mouthed to Fenwick, "You feel that?" and she nodded, jaw tight. When the sarabande ended, there was a brief, polite silence, as if the empty room expected applause. The house had a history, of course. In Savannah, houses accumulate story the way live oaks gather Spanish moss, one breath, and you are clothed in what came before you. Odile Carpenter had bought the Nabe in 1974 with her first real paycheck from the conservatory where she taught. She had trained generations of children to curve their fingers like gentle pals, to count out loud, to breathe through nerves. She had hosted small recitals in the front parlor, little boys in stiff collars, little girls with bows that smiled even when they didn't. Caius knew this because in the weeks after the second night, he took to visiting old Mrs. Beaumont on the next block, who had been Odile's friend since summer dresses cost less than a bus ticket. He brought her ginger tea, she brought him names. Odile did not marry, Mrs. Beaumont said, with the complicated pride some women use to say a woman chose herself. Odile did not need to. She kept afternoons for students and evenings for pieces she wanted to meet again. If you heard music after midnight, it was because her mind had decided to go walking and her hands did not want her to go alone. Caius asked about family, about nieces, about anyone who might have keys. Mrs. Beaumont leaned back. The nieces did right by her. But Odile's real legacy is in the wrists of children, who can now make a room ask for mercy. She smiled. If the house is playing at 3, maybe it's just remembering how to talk. The third night brought rain hard enough to erase chalk from sidewalks. The piano began at 3:04 with something American copland, maybe open and upright as a prairie. The left-hand octaves came like fence posts along a road. Rhodes stood in the hall, dripping on the polished heart pine, and felt the hair along his arms think the thought it thinks before it stands. The sound was too clear, too present, to be a speaker hidden somewhere. He pressed his ear against the underside of the keyboard, reckless and gentle all at once, and listened there. He heard woodworking, felt creak and give. He pulled back and swallowed rain. Fenwick called the lab, not because lab techs solve hauntings, but because she trusted men and women who make their living saying, this is a fact and this is not. The lab sent a sound engineer on the 4th night. He arrived with a small case and an undramatic face, set up microphones, and mapped the way the sound bloomed in the room. He traced it like a weather system. He shook his head, not unhappily. It's a piano, all right. It's hammers striking strings. The waveforms don't lie. He gestured at the action, the fallboard, the keys. If it isn't a person, it's a mechanism I have never met. You'd think it was a player, Mr. Patel offered again, stubborn as a superstition that used to keep you safe. But where's the roll? Nora crouched and put her palm flat on the bare floor in front of the lyre, breath held like a child listening to a secret inside a seashell. She looked up. Feel that. They all did. Not a vibration exactly, more like a miniature version of thunder when it is far and polite. As if the house were a body with a heart beating very, very softly. Caius began to arrive early, at 2:45, with a folding chair and a thermos. He took notes in a small pad he used when hand-lettering menus for restaurants. Tempo, piece, weather, number of listeners. He discovered that the set lists, if that is what they were, made a kind of sense. Debussy the first night, liquid and moonbitten, Bach the second, exacting and austere, American the third, shoulders back. On the 5th night came Chopin, a nocturne in E minor that stepped like someone finding their way through their own house in the dark without turning on the light. On the 6th, Satie, that famous gymnopédie that sounds like someone remembering a conversation and only later realizing what they should have said. On the 7th night, the piano did not play. At 3 o'clock, the block held its breath, and then, shy or wise, let it go. Caius packed his chair, embarrassed at his own hope. Nora turned on her porch light and then, half smiling, turned it back off. The realtor, nervous about liability, scheduled a full inspection the next day. A structural guy with hands like shovels walked the joists and hummed. A piano tech from Tybee Island arrived with a satchel and a reverence. He took the action apart and laid its bones gently on a quilt. He showed them the jacks, the whippins, the flanges. He pressed dampers against strings, counted, and pronounced the instrument healthy for its age and history. He found only one oddity, and it was not mechanical. Tucked inside the case, caught between the soundboard and a brace, was a small envelope the color of tea. It had been there a long time. On the front, in Odile's hand. For the person who hears it, the room forgot how to breathe for a second. The piano tech handed the envelope to Barrett, who handed it to Nora, who looked at Caius and then at Officer Rhodes and said, "You better." Caius opened it. Inside, one page in a tight old-fashioned script. "If you are reading this, you are listening," Odile had written. "If you are listening, you may hear what most houses forget to say out loud. I have taught many to count. I have taught some to sing. I have failed some and forgiven myself slowly. I left the piano because I could not bear the idea of it being lonely if I took it somewhere that did not know this air. If it plays when I am gone, let it. If it stops, let it rest. I have, in the middle of the night, heard keys move under my hands without me having asked them to. I have believed this was grief and then believed it was kindness, and then believed it was just the way wood remembers being a tree. If you must name it, call it practice. The letter ended with a short list of pieces she loved at 3 in the morning and a small instruction in parentheses that was not, in fact, written with those marks, but with Odil's own delicate dashes. Leave the north window a finger's width open when it is not raining. The instrument likes to hear the live oaks whisper. That night, clouds flew low, 2 hurried to stay. At 2:59, Caius propped the north window only a sliver, just enough for the air to acknowledge the room. At 3, nothing. At 3:01, the first notes of the Goldberg variations rose and unbuttoned the dark. Savannah kept her manners. Crowds did not gather. People did not shout or film with the kind of greed that makes things smaller. They sat on stoops with mugs. They stood in hallways with their hands around their own wrists, the way people stand with themselves at wakes. The police came when called, then stayed uncalled. Barrett, the realtor, began to arrive too, not because it helped sell the house, but because he had not known a job could include being present for something that did not ask for money. On the 10th night, a woman in a green raincoat stopped on the front steps and did not come inside. She was in her 40s, hair cut short for hot weather, hands with a musician's map of callous and grace. When the piece ended, a Schubert impromptu that made the room softly astonished, she said, quietly, "Odile?" Mrs. Beaumont, hearing it, came in on Caius's arm and said the name, the way a friend says it when the friend is late on purpose. "Juniper Miles," she said, "piano class of 1997, the only student Odile ever called ferocious." Juniper smiled and made a face that admitted both pride and apology. "I left for Chicago and then for everywhere else. I did not come back when I should have. I am here now." She looked at the nave. "May I?" The house gathered itself. Juniper sat on the bench, didn't touch for a count of 5, then set her fingers where they had learned once to listen. She played something that did not need a name, the way warm water does not need a name when you have been cold too long. In the middle of the phrase, a note moved that she had not struck. It came into the chord like a clever friend inserting a joke. Juniper laughed under her breath, cheeks wet, and shifted. The instrument and the woman spoke for a while like people who had promised not to argue and then argued anyway and then remembered why they loved each other. It went on for 3 weeks. Not every night, not on demand. Sometimes the house slept. Sometimes the city rained too hard for even ghosts to be heard. Sometimes a siren ran its thin salt line down the block, and the piano waited until the sound had passed. Once, in the middle of a storm that made the gutters spit, it played a lullaby Odile had composed for a boy named Manu in 1986 when his mother was sick and he kept falling asleep on the bench. Mrs. Beaumont recognized it and cried without bothering to hide it. The story found its small, polite way into the paper, 2 paragraphs on page 3, written by a local reporter who understood that fact and wonder are not enemies. The headline used the word mystery because that is the word that lets everyone keep their peace. No one mocked, no one tried to monetize. In a city that sells its own past by the scoop, that was a kind of miracle. On the last night, October arrived dressed as September's tired sister. The air cooled, the live oaks shook their sleeves. Caius woke at 2:40, not startled, just called. He walked across the street, unlocked the door with the realtor's blessing, and sat in the dark. He did not bring a thermos. He did not bring his pad. At 3, the piano did not start. At 3:03, either a 3:05. At 3:07, a tiny sound, not a key, not a pedal, cloth on wood. Juniper stepped into the parlor and took her place. She played the Lighthouse song from someone else's life, then Odile's favorite warm-up, then something Caius could not place that sounded like forgiveness given gently and not all at once. In the second page, a breeze from the north window touched the back of his neck, a key depressed that her fingers had not chosen. Juniper did not correct it. She smiled and let the note belong. When it ended, the city had the particular quiet of a decision. Juniper stood, laid her hand on the fallboard, and moved it down slowly until the keys were covered. She did not latch it. She turned to Caius and Nora and Rhodes and Mrs. Beaumont and Barrett and Mr. Patel and the handful of others who had become the kind of congregation that forms without a bulletin. She said, There. And it sounded like a benediction. The piano did not play at 3 after that. Not the next night, not the next week, not in November when the air remembered how to be crisp, not in December when wreaths hung and college students went home and someone left a red scarf on the iron gate and no one took it because it looked like it belonged to the fence. The house stayed empty and not empty, listed and not for long, a property and a promise. In late January, a family bought it, a dental hygienist named Leora with a laugh that took the corners off bad news. Her husband, Arlo, who repaired old radios and believed sound should be coaxed and not forced. Their daughter, Elowen 6, who walked into the front parlor, saw the nabe, put both hands flat on its cheek, and said, "Hello," as if greeting a very old dog. Juniper came on a Saturday with a claw-footed lamp Odile had loved and set it by the window without being asked. Sometimes, walking home from the shop, Caius would slow by the gate. He would hear scales around dinner time, small fingers finding middle C, laughter at wrong notes, the stern patience of a mother counting. Once, later than practice, earlier than worry, he heard a phrase of Debussy float through the sliver of the north window and thought, not possessively, but with gratitude, you kept one thing the way it liked to be. Every now and then, at 3 in the morning, he would wake, because the body remembers the hour it learned to lean forward. He would listen. The city would give him what the city gives. A siren's shrug, a train's whisper, the far scrape of a palm frond on a gutter. He would not hear the piano. He would hear instead that quieter, deeper thing. A house that had been asked to keep a story and had kept it as long as it needed keeping, and then, with good manners and a bow, set it down. If you ever pass Jones Street near 3, look up. Someone might be washing a glass, someone might be turning a page. Someone might be dreaming a tune with their hands open on the covers. And in number 119, a girl might be asleep on the sofa with sheet music like a blanket, the north window left a finger's width open, the live oaks telling secrets in a language no one invented and everyone somehow understands. You could say nothing happened here. A vacant house made noise until it didn't. Keys moved and then they were still. Or you could say a small piece of the world did its best impression of grace and a few ordinary people showed up in time to hear it. Both things can be true. Both are enough. Wherever you are, whatever hour your own house favors, if you hear a song that has no source, let it finish, then wait one breath longer than you think you need. Sometimes, in that extra beat, you will feel the floor answer the air the way a body answers its name. And if you cannot name it, if the sensible part of you demands a mechanism, call it practice. Then stand in the doorway and be the kind of neighbor who listens.